give our audience a democratic chance to have something of theirs to say. There's a gentleman there in the middle, holding up
my name's Edward Malnick. It's been mentioned that the monarch pins medals on soldiers, and I just wondered whether the panellists have given any more thought to the role that the royal family play as colonels-in-chief of the various regiments, as it seems to me that soldiers actually quite value that role as that they have as figureheads. And I just wondered whether an elected president, perhaps President Beckham, for example, would give so much respect to the armed forces and receive it in return.
Gerry?
Yeah, I mean, I think that put your finger on one of the key symbolic roles of a constitutional monarch, and I think it's evidently the case that if you spoke to many members of the armed forces, the fact that there is a connection with somebody who has both a history and a connection with the United Kingdom and is politically neutral is quite important from their point of view. I suppose the thing about all symbols is that it partly comes out of what the person does, but it's also partly what symbols get put onto the person as well. I think that if you look around the world, it's perfectly possible to see similar constructions. I mean, and I think that too often we immediately rush to make a comparison with the United States of America, but in many ways that's too a rather unusual political system and regime. There are many other parts of the world that do have heads of state that aren't hereditary monarchs, that are constitutional characters in exactly the same way as our constitutional monarch is, and they can also act as a focal point for unity. But I suppose the truth is that you've got to ask whether or not, if you change, that sense of symbolism will continue. I think there's good arguments to say that it might well, and that's probably one reason why people are still, in the long run, keeping their minds open as to whether or not they want to go down the road of a continuous constitutional monarchy.
What about the dead soldiers?
Sorry, hang on one second. We'll come to it in a second. Ian, would a dentist monarch have the same sort of cachet? A President Beckham, no matter how good their shoes were, have the same sort of authority?
Well, the question was specifically about the role of Commander-in-Chief or Colonel of Forces. And while I don't make any claims for my dentist or for David Beckham, I can give two examples which I think show, to my mind, conclusively why a hereditary monarch is a very unsuitable person to be a colonel or a commander-in-chief. One is Edward, Duke of whatever it was, whatever it is, sorry, the one who didn't cut it at Lymstone Commando. Suppose he was the king. What respect would he get from the armed forces? Now, I'm not dissing him personally, it's not what he was cut out for. He didn't choose that role, but because it's known that members of the Windsor family have to be colonels and so on, they are pushed into military careers which may not suit their personalities. The other, more serious example is George V, who did indeed feel a particular affinity to the army. Because he felt particular affinity to the army, he felt particular affinity to the Curragh mutineers in the spring of 1914, which meant that he was actively lined up against his elected government. Extremely dangerous. I'd actually rather have my dentist.
No, sorry, there was a gentleman at the back who wanted to make a point, I think.
I just said, what about the dead soldiers? How do they feel about it? Especially from working class families who have largely been uneducated and don't really know what's going on.
Do you think that they would rather have the constitutional?
I don't think they understand what's going. I don't think they understand one end of it from the other, frankly.
Peter, do you want to say anything before we?
Well, only on the issue of that, it's not the monarchy who sends the soldiers into these stupid conflicts, as I understand it. There is an important point here. The monarchy in this country occupies a space which politicians would love to occupy, that focus of love and loyalty, and to some extent adulation and patriotism, which leaders of countries tend to become, and do become, in countries which don't have constitutional monarchies. If you want to have a leader culture, where the armed forces and the police and the civil service, and indeed all the propaganda organs of the state are directed towards an elected political individual, then you can have that. But there seem to me to be certain dangers in this. The monarchy in our constitution performs the role that the king does on the chessboard. Doesn't do very much, but prevents others from occupying a very important square. And if the monarchy steps aside and politicians move into that square, you have a very, very different culture, and a much more dangerous one, one much more open to abuse.
It would be the most prominent Nazi in British society.
Well, that's contentious, and he also didn't become king.
Hang on 1 second, someone wanted to comment on this point, and then there's a question at the back.
Peter's last point was actually Orwell's serious point about the monarchy. I mean, he plays quite a lot on this, that if you separated the kind of, the flummery and the symbolism, etc., from the power, it was helpful, and that was in itself an insulation against dictatorship.
But that is the classic argument for separating out head of state from head of government. But you don't have to do it by way of a constitutional monarchy. So it's not an argument for a constitutional monarchy. It's just saying that it would be a good idea to have a separation.
Phrase with a family with the wrong members in charge.
Hang on 1 second. So let's sort of finish his point.
There is one important constitutional point, which is the royal prerogative powers are used by ministers with less parliamentary scrutiny than they should have, because they're the royal prerogative powers. But it would be much easier to get political consensus to say, put the royal prerogative powers on a statutory basis, than it would be to say, get a political consensus to abolish the monarchy so that we have to create another system. It's important to put the royal prerogative powers of peace and war on a statutory basis.
If you want to reform, how about this? There have been some calls for recall of Parliament over the past couple of weeks over the Libyan war. Seem to me to be entirely reasonable calls. Do you know who can recall Parliament? The Speaker can't. The majority of the House of Commons can't. The only person who can recall Parliament is the Prime Minister. That's absolutely disgraceful. And that's a reform which seems to me to be one well worth working for, that Parliament could be recalled in defiance of the government, which you say could really hold it to account. That would be something worth working for. This republicanism is a sideshow compared with the reforms that our system really